It was just a couple's portrait, but something in the background doesn't belong. Dr. Rebecca Torres carefully lifted the antique photograph from its protective archival box in the climate-controlled storage room of the Savannah History Museum. The image showed a formal couple's portrait, the kind wealthy Southern families commissioned in the late 19th century to document their status and respectability. Outside, the humid Georgia afternoon pressed against the museum's windows, but inside, Rebecca was transported to 1885, the date carefully written in faded ink on the back of the photograph. The couple sat in an ornate parlor that spoke of wealth and refinement. Heavy velvet curtains framed tall windows. An elaborate Persian rug covered the floor. Mahogany furniture with intricate carvings suggested Old South aristocracy. Everything about the setting screamed privilege and social position. The man sat in a high-backed chair, perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair neatly parted and a serious expression. He wore a well-tailored suit with a high collar and silk cravat. His hands rested formally on the arms of the chair, his posture rigid as was customary for photographs of that era. Beside him stood a woman of similar age, her hand resting lightly on the back of his chair. She wore an elegant dress with intricate lace at the collar and cuffs, her hair styled in the fashion of the 1880s. Her expression was dignified, almost serene, though her eyes held something Rebecca couldn't quite identify. Strength, wariness, perhaps both. What struck Rebecca immediately was how unusual the composition seemed. Most couple portraits of this era showed both subjects seated or both standing. Having the woman stand while the man sat suggested a deliberate choice. But why? Rebecca had been hired by the museum to catalog and research a collection of photographs recently donated by a prominent Savannah family. Most were typical: family gatherings, children in Sunday clothes, elderly patriarchs posing with stern faces. But this particular image had caught her attention the moment she saw it. There was something about the couple's faces, a tension beneath the formal poses, a story hiding behind their careful expressions. After 15 years studying historical photographs, Rebecca had developed an instinct for images that held secrets. She carried the photograph to her desk and placed it on the scanner bed. The museum had invested in high-resolution digital imaging equipment specifically for preserving and studying their historical collections. Rebecca had used it dozens of times, but each scan still felt like opening a window into the past. As the machine hummed, capturing every microscopic detail of the 139-year-old image, Rebecca created a new file in her research database. She typed preliminary observations: formal couple portrait, circa 1885, Savannah residence, evident wealth, subjects approximately 28-32 years old, unusual pose composition, further investigation needed. She had no idea that this photograph would consume the next 4 months of her life and reveal one of the most extraordinary love stories in Savannah's hidden history. Rebecca opened the high-resolution scan on her computer and began her systematic examination. She always started with the subject's faces, then moved outward to clothing, furniture, and background details. Every element of a historical photograph told part of the story. She zoomed in on the man's face first. His features were refined, suggesting good breeding and privilege, but there was something haunted in his eyes, a sadness or perhaps guilt that the formal pose couldn't quite hide. Small lines around his mouth suggested he didn't smile often. The woman's face demanded more attention. Rebecca increased the magnification. Her features were striking: high cheekbones, full lips, intelligent eyes. Her skin tone was difficult to determine precisely in the sepia-toned photograph, but Rebecca suspected she might be of mixed race, which would have been unusual but not impossible in a wealthy Savannah household of 1885. Rebecca zoomed out and examined their clothing. Both were dressed expensively. The woman's dress showed fine craftsmanship, hand-sewn lace, quality fabric, attention to detail. This wasn't servant's clothing. This was the dress of someone with means, or married to means. Then Rebecca turned her attention to the background. The parlor was elaborately decorated. She could see framed artwork on the walls, an ornate mirror, decorative sconces. She zoomed in on each wall decoration systematically, noting details. That's when she saw it. On the wall behind and slightly to the left of the couple, partially obscured by shadow but clearly visible when magnified, hung a framed document. Rebecca increased the resolution and adjusted the contrast to bring out details hidden by age and fading. Her breath caught. It was a certificate of some kind, Formal, official, with decorative borders and elaborate script. She could make out some words. State of Georgia. Hereby granted. Freedom. Rebecca's hands trembled as she adjusted the image further. More words became visible. Certificate of manumission. January 15th, 1884. A certificate of manumission. A document of freedom. An official paper declaring that an enslaved person was now free. Dated January 15th, 1884. Just 1 year before this photograph was taken. Rebecca sat back in her chair, her mind racing. Why would a wealthy white couple in Savannah have a freedom certificate framed and hanging prominently in their parlor in 1885? Manumission, the formal freeing of enslaved people, had been rendered moot by the 13th Amendment in 1865, which abolished slavery entirely. By 1884, such certificates were historical artifacts, not current documents. Unless, Rebecca's pulse quickened, unless the woman in the photograph was the person named on that certificate. She zoomed in on the woman's face again, studying her features with new understanding. The dignified posture, the expensive clothing, the hand resting on the man's chair in a gesture of intimacy and equality. If Rebecca's suspicion was correct, this wasn't just a couple's portrait. This was a revolutionary document, evidence of something that shouldn't have existed in 1885 Savannah. She needed to see that certificate more clearly. Rebecca spent the next 2 hours working with the digital image, using every enhancement technique she knew to make the certificate more legible. She adjusted contrast, sharpened edges, filtered out noise, and slowly, painstakingly, the words emerged. State of Georgia, Chatham County. Be it known that on this 15th day of January, in the year of our Lord 1884, I, Robert James Fairchild, of sound mind and legal authority, do hereby grant full and complete freedom to Clara, aged approximately 28 years, previously held as property under the laws of this state. Clara. The woman in the photograph had a name. Rebecca's hands shook as she continued reading. Said Clara is hereby released from all bonds of servitude and granted all rights and privileges of a free person under the laws of Georgia and the United States. The signature at the bottom was elaborate and confident. Robert James Fairchild. Rebecca immediately searched the museum's genealogy database for that name. The Fairchild family was well documented, one of Savannah's oldest and wealthiest families, their fortune built on rice and cotton plantations before the Civil War. She found Robert James Fairchild in the 1860 census. Born 1853, son of plantation owner James Thomas Fairchild. The family had owned over 300 enslaved people across multiple properties in coastal Georgia. Robert would have been 12 years old when the Civil War ended and slavery was abolished. He would have grown up in a world where his family's wealth and status were built on human bondage, and then watched that world collapse. By 1880, the family's holdings had diminished significantly, but they still owned considerable property in Savannah. Robert was listed as gentleman in the city directory, meaning he lived off inherited wealth and didn't work for a living. But something must have happened between 1880 and 1884, something that led Robert to formally grant freedom to Clara, even though technically she was already free under federal law, and then frame that certificate on his wall. Rebecca found an 1884 probate record that provided a clue. Robert's father, James Thomas Fairchild, had died in December 1883. His will divided the estate among his children, but included a curious provision. Any persons still residing on Fairchild properties who were formerly held in bondage are to be immediately removed and prohibited from further residence or employment. In other words, Robert's father wanted all formerly enslaved people gone from family properties, even those who had stayed on as paid workers after emancipation, which was common. Robert had inherited the main Savannah house, and 1 month after his father's death, he had issued Clara her certificate of manumission, a symbolic act since she was already legally free, but perhaps a necessary formality to grant her legal documentation of her status. But why frame it on the wall? And why was Clara still living in the house a year later? Clearly not as a servant, but as what? Rebecca looked at the photograph again, at the intimate gesture of Clara's hand on Robert's chair, at their careful poses, at the certificate hanging behind them. A terrible, wonderful suspicion began to form. Rebecca spent the weekend thinking about the photograph, unable to shake the feeling that she was on the edge of discovering something extraordinary. On Monday morning, she went straight to the Chatham County Courthouse to search marriage records. Marriage certificates from the 1880s were handwritten in large leather-bound registry books, organized chronologically. Rebecca requested the volumes for 1884 and 1885. She scanned page after page of marriages, Johnson to Miller, Williams to Davis, countless unions documented in careful script, but she found no marriage between Robert Fairchild and Clara anyone. She wasn't entirely surprised. If Robert and Clara had married in Georgia in 1885, it would have been illegal. Georgia's anti-miscegenation laws, which prohibited marriages between white and black people, had been on the books since 1750 and remained in force. Even though Clara was now free, the law made no distinction. The punishment for interracial marriage included fines, imprisonment, and the marriage being declared void. But Rebecca had a hunch. Many couples who couldn't marry legally in the South traveled north to states with more permissive laws. She contacted archives in Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and New York, states that had abolished anti-miscegenation laws decades earlier. 3 days later, she received a response from the Massachusetts State Archives. They had found a marriage record. Robert James Fairchild of Georgia to Clara Fairchild of Georgia, married in Boston on March 3, 1885, exactly 6 weeks before the photograph was taken. Clara Fairchild. She had taken his name. Rebecca sat back, overwhelmed. Robert, son of a plantation owner, had freed Clara from the technical bonds of his family's former ownership, traveled with her to Boston, married her legally, and brought her back to Savannah as his wife. In 1885 Georgia, this wasn't just socially unacceptable, it was dangerous. Interracial couples faced violence, ostracism, and constant threat. The Ku Klux Klan was actively operating throughout the South. Lynchings were common. The brief hope of Reconstruction had collapsed, replaced by Jim Crow laws designed to reestablish white supremacy. Yet Robert and Clara had returned to Savannah and commissioned a formal portrait, a public declaration of their union, even if they couldn't call it marriage under Georgia law. And they had deliberately included Clara's freedom certificate in the background. Not hidden, not tucked away, but prominently displayed. It was a statement. She is free. She is my equal. This is our home. Rebecca knew she needed to find out what happened to them. Had they managed to stay in Savannah? Had they survived the inevitable backlash? Did they have children? And most importantly, how long had their courage lasted before the world crushed them? She returned to the museum archives to search for any other records of Robert and Clara Fairchild. Rebecca discovered that tracing Robert and Clara's lives in Savannah was like following ghosts. They appeared in some records but were conspicuously absent from others, suggesting they lived deliberately quiet lives, trying not to draw attention. The 1890 census had been destroyed in a fire, so that potential source was lost. But city directories provided some clues. Robert Fairchild was listed at the address of the Fairchild family home on Habersham Street from 1885 through 1887. His occupation, private investor. No wife was listed beside his name, not unusual, as many directories only listed male heads of household, but it confirmed he remained in Savannah after the photograph was taken. Rebecca found scattered references in other documents. A property tax record from 1886 showed Robert still owned the Habersham Street house. A bank record from 1887 showed he maintained accounts at the Savannah Merchants Bank. Then Rebecca found something unexpected in the archives of the First African Baptist Church, one of the oldest black churches in Savannah, with records dating back to the 1780s. In a ledger of charitable donations from 1886, she found anonymous donation, $500 for school supplies and teacher salaries, delivered by Mrs. C. Fairchild. $500 in 1886 was a substantial sum, equivalent to perhaps $15,000 today, and it was delivered by Mrs. C. Fairchild. Rebecca found more donations in subsequent years. 1887, $400, 1888, $350, all delivered by Mrs. C. Fairchild, all designated for education of black children in Savannah. Clara wasn't just living quietly as Robert's hidden wife. She was actively working to help her community, using her access to Robert's wealth to fund education, knowing that education was both power and pathway to freedom. But Rebecca also found darker records. In newspaper archives, she discovered several troubling items. A letter to the editor of the Savannah Morning News from 1886 complained about certain individuals who violate the natural order by cohabitating across racial lines, corrupting our city's moral character. Another letter from 1887 was more explicit. It is well known that Robert Fairchild, once a respectable member of Savannah society, now lives in open defiance of law and custom with a negress. This abomination should not be tolerated. The newspapers never printed Robert or Clara's responses, if they wrote any, but Rebecca found evidence that the Fairchild family had disowned Robert. His brother Charles published a notice in 1887 stating, "Robert J. Fairchild is no longer recognized as member of the Fairchild family and does not speak for family interests." Rebecca imagined Clara and Robert in that elegant parlor, the certificate hanging on the wall behind them, surrounded by hostile neighbors and rejected by family, holding on to each other and their principles while the world condemned them. How long could such courage last? Rebecca's breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While searching through the papers of a Savannah abolitionist family, Quakers who had remained in the South after the war to help formerly enslaved people, she found a collection of correspondence that included several letters from Robert Fairchild. The first letter, dated June 1885, was written just weeks after the photograph was taken. "Dear friends, I write to thank you for your kindness to Clara and myself during these difficult months. Your friendship sustains us when others turn away. Clara wishes me to convey her particular gratitude for the introduction to the teachers at the Freedmen's School. She has begun volunteering there twice weekly, teaching reading to young children. This work brings her great joy. As for myself, I confess the ostracism from my family and former friends weighs heavily. But when I see Clara's face as she teaches those children who look like her, children who were denied education as she once was, I know we made the right choice. Love, I am learning, is not merely a feeling, but a daily act of choosing someone despite the cost." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. The formal language couldn't hide Robert's genuine emotion. Another letter from December 1885 was more troubled. "The threats have become more frequent. Last week, someone left a burning cross in our front yard during the night. Clara maintains remarkable composure, but I see the fear in her eyes. I purchased a rifle and have begun keeping watch at night. Some friends counsel us to leave Savannah, to go north where we might live more openly. But Clara refuses to run. She says she was enslaved in Georgia, and she will live free in Georgia. Her courage shames my fears." A letter from March 1887 revealed more. Clara is teaching now at 3 different locations: the church school, a private home where elder women learn to read, and on Saturdays at our own house, where any child may come for lessons. I provide the space and supplies. She provides the instruction, and more importantly, the inspiration. The children love her. Yesterday, a girl of perhaps 7 years told Clara, "I want to be a teacher like you when I grow up." Clara wept afterward. Tears of joy, she insisted, though I suspect also tears for the childhood she never had, the education she was denied. We are building something here, however small. Perhaps that is enough. But the final letter Rebecca found, dated November 1887, was chilling. "We have decided to leave Savannah. The situation has become untenable. 3 nights ago, a group of men, I counted at least 8, surrounded our house shouting threats and obscenities. They threw rocks through our windows and promised to return. Clara was terrified, though she will not admit it. I will not risk her life for pride or principle. We are making arrangements to relocate to Philadelphia, where we have contacts among the Friends community. It breaks my heart to abandon our home, but Clara's safety must come first." Rebecca sat back, processing this information. Robert and Clara had tried to build a life in Savannah for less than 3 years before violence drove them away. The photograph had been taken in April 1885. By November 1887, they were fleeing for their lives. She needed to find out what happened to them in Philadelphia. Rebecca contacted the Historical Society of Pennsylvania and the archives of several Quaker meetings in Philadelphia. Within a week, she had assembled a new picture of Robert and Clara's lives in the North. They appeared in the 1890 Philadelphia City Directory. Robert Fairchild, clerk, residing at an address in a modest but respectable neighborhood. Significantly, Clara was listed too. Clara Fairchild, teacher. In Philadelphia, they could live openly as a married couple. Pennsylvania had never had anti-miscegenation laws, and Philadelphia's Quaker community was notably progressive on racial issues. While they certainly still faced prejudice, they were no longer in physical danger simply for existing together. Rebecca found Clara's name in the employment records of the Institute for Colored Youth, a prestigious school for black students in Philadelphia. She had been hired in 1888 to teach primary grades, reading, writing, and arithmetic. A biographical sketch of Clara, written in 1895 for the school's newsletter, provided rare details about her early life. Mrs. Clara Fairchild was born into slavery in Georgia circa 1856. She never knew her father and was separated from her mother at age 8 when her mother was sold away. Despite laws prohibiting enslaved people from learning to read, Clara taught herself using a discarded Bible and newspapers she found. After emancipation, she remained on the Fairchild plantation as a paid domestic worker, saving her earnings in hopes of eventually leaving Georgia. Following her marriage to Robert Fairchild in 1885, she discovered her true calling as an educator. She now teaches 60 children and serves as an example that neither slavery nor prejudice can extinguish the human spirit's desire for knowledge and dignity. Rebecca read this passage 3 times, deeply moved. Clara had endured unimaginable trauma, enslaved, separated from her mother, denied education. Yet she had transformed her pain into purpose, teaching children so they would never suffer as she had suffered. And Robert had not just freed her, he had fully partnered with her, supporting her work and sharing her mission. Rebecca found more evidence of their lives together. Robert worked as a clerk in a shipping company, a respectable but modest job, far beneath what his birth and education might have afforded him in Savannah. But he seemed content. A letter he wrote to his Quaker friends in 1892 said simply, "Clara thrives here. She is respected for her mind and her work. That is worth more than any privilege I abandoned." They had no children, which was probably deliberate. The world was still too dangerous for mixed-race children of a white father and black mother, but they had each other. For 12 more years after leaving Savannah, they built a quiet, dignified life together in Philadelphia, teaching, working, loving, surviving. Then, in 1899, Rebecca found Robert's death certificate. He had died of pneumonia at age 46. Cause of death, pneumonia. Next of kin, Clara Fairchild, wife. Even in death, their marriage was legally recognized in Pennsylvania. That small dignity would have been denied them in Georgia. Rebecca found Clara's death certificate 4 years later, in 1903. She had died at age 47. The cause was listed as heart failure, but Rebecca suspected it was a broken heart. Clara had lost everything in her life, her mother, her freedom, her home, but she had found Robert. When he died, perhaps she simply had no more strength to continue. They were buried together in Eden Cemetery, a historic black cemetery in Philadelphia. Armed with the full story, Rebecca returned her attention to the photograph. She now understood what she was looking at, not just a couple's portrait, but a declaration of love and defiance. Robert and Clara had commissioned this photograph knowing it might be the only lasting proof of their marriage. In Georgia, their union was illegal and unrecognized. The photograph was their testimony. We existed, we loved each other, we were married, whatever the law said. And the certificate on the wall, Clara's manumission document, was deliberate symbolism. Robert was saying to anyone who saw the photograph, "I freed her. She is my equal. She is my wife." Rebecca decided to write a comprehensive article about the photograph for the journal Southern Historical Quarterly. But first, she wanted to do something else. She wanted to find their descendants. Through genealogical databases and DNA testing services that connected historical records with living people, Rebecca began searching. She started with Clara's family, the mother she had been separated from at age 8. It took weeks of painstaking research, but Rebecca eventually identified Clara's mother, a woman named Ruth, who had been sold to a plantation in South Carolina in 1864. Ruth had survived the war, gained her freedom, and lived until 1891. She had had 3 other children besides Clara, children Clara probably never knew existed. Those children had descendants. Rebecca found them scattered across South Carolina, Georgia, and beyond. Great-great-grandchildren of Clara's mother, which made them Clara's great-great-nieces and nephews by blood. Robert's descendants were easier to trace. His brother Charles, the one who had disowned him, had children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. They were prominent in Savannah society to this day. Rebecca sent carefully worded letters to 15 people, 8 descendants of Clara's mother, 7 descendants of Robert's brother. She explained the photograph, the story, and asked if any would be interested in learning more. 12 responded. All wanted to know more. Rebecca arranged a meeting in Savannah for all who could attend. She chose the Savannah History Museum, the same place where she had first discovered the photograph. On a warm Saturday in May 2024, 8 people gathered in the museum's conference room. 4 black descendants of Clara's family, 4 white descendants of Robert's family. None had known the story. None had known that their ancestors were connected. Rebecca displayed the photograph on a large screen and told them everything she had learned. As she spoke, she watched their faces. Shock, pride, sadness, wonder. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then a woman named Michelle, one of Clara's descendants, spoke quietly. My grandmother always told me that our ancestors survived slavery and became teachers, but she never mentioned Clara by name. I think maybe the story was too painful, or maybe it was deliberately forgotten. But Clara was a hero. She taught herself to read when it was illegal. She married the man she loved when it was forbidden. She devoted her life to educating children. I'm proud to be her family. A man named James, one of Robert's descendants, spoke next. I grew up hearing that we had a black sheep ancestor who had been disowned, but no one ever said why. Now I know. Robert wasn't a black sheep. He was the only one in his family who had the courage to do what was right. I'm ashamed of what my ancestors did to him, and I'm proud of what he did. The group spent hours talking, sharing family stories, comparing photographs and documents. Strangers in the morning, they left as family, bound by the courage of 2 people who had loved each other 139 years ago. The descendants decided to create a memorial to Robert and Clara. Not a grand monument. That felt wrong for 2 people who had lived such deliberately quiet lives, but something meaningful and permanent. They chose to place a plaque in Eden Cemetery in Philadelphia, where Robert and Clara were buried. The original graves had simple markers with just their names and dates. The new plaque would tell their story. Rebecca worked with the descendants to write the inscription. It went through multiple drafts before they finally agreed on the words. Robert James Fairchild, 1853-1899, and Clara Fairchild, 1856 to 1903. In 1885, when their love was forbidden by law, they chose each other anyway. Robert freed Clara from the bonds of his family's former ownership and married her, abandoning wealth and status for dignity and truth. Together, they devoted their lives to education and justice. Though forced to flee Georgia by violence and hatred, they never fled from their principles or from each other. This memorial honors their courage, their love, and their unshakable belief that all human beings deserve freedom, respect, and equality. The dedication ceremony took place on a warm afternoon in June 2024. About 30 people attended. The descendants Rebecca had found, colleagues from the museum, members of the Institute for Colored Youth's successor school, and several people from Philadelphia's Quaker community whose ancestors had helped Robert and Clara. Rebecca stood before the gathered group and spoke about the photograph, the image that had started this entire journey. When I first saw this portrait, I knew there was something unusual about it, she said, but I didn't realize I was looking at one of the most courageous acts of love in American history. Robert and Clara didn't just fall in love, they chose love knowing it might cost them everything. And it did cost them almost everything. Their families, their home, their safety, but they never regretted it. And they used their love as a foundation to do good in the world, especially through education. She projected the photograph on a screen. Look at this image. Look at Clara's hand resting on Robert's chair. Look at the certificate on the wall behind them. The document declaring Clara's freedom displayed prominently for all to see. This photograph is an act of defiance. It says, "We exist. We love each other. We are equal. We will not be erased." After the ceremony, the descendants stood together around the graves, this multiracial family created by Robert and Clara's courage. They placed flowers on the graves and took photographs together, creating a new image to stand alongside the one from 1885. Michelle, Clara's descendant, spoke to the group. For 100 years, this story was buried. Clara and Robert were forgotten. But because one historian cared enough to look closely at an old photograph, we now know the truth. We know that our ancestors loved bravely. We know that they survived. We know that their love created this family standing here today. Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face. This was why she had become a historian, to rescue forgotten stories, to honor forgotten lives, to prove that ordinary people could do extraordinary things. 3 months after the cemetery ceremony, Rebecca's article was published in Southern Historical Quarterly. It was titled, "A Portrait of Forbidden Love, Robert and Clara Fairchild and the Courage to Marry Across the Color Line in 1885 Georgia." The article went viral, an unusual fate for an academic historical journal. Major newspapers picked it up. NPR interviewed Rebecca. The photograph appeared on social media, shared thousands of times, with people around the world expressing amazement at Robert and Clara's story. The Savannah History Museum created a special exhibition around the photograph, titled Love and Defiance, The Fairchilds of Savannah. It included the original portrait, enlarged details showing Clara's manumission certificate on the wall, documents from Rebecca's research, letters from Robert and Clara, and photographs of their descendants standing together. On opening day, over 500 people attended, far more than the museum had anticipated. The crowd was diverse, black and white, young and old, locals and tourists, straight couples and same-sex couples, all coming to see proof that love could survive hatred. Rebecca stood in the gallery watching people examine the photograph. She saw a young black woman stop in front of it, staring at Clara's face for a long time, tears in her eyes. She saw an elderly white man read the entire story, then sit down on a bench and weep. She saw a mixed-race couple hold hands tightly as they looked at Robert and Clara, perhaps seeing themselves reflected across 139 years. One visitor, a college student, asked Rebecca a question. Do you think they were happy? After everything they lost, everything they endured, do you think it was worth it? Rebecca considered the question carefully. I think happiness is complicated, she said finally. Robert and Clara faced terrible things: violence, exile, poverty, rejection. But every letter Robert wrote, every document I found, suggests they never regretted their choice. Robert wrote once that seeing Clara teach children made every sacrifice worth it, and Clara devoted her entire life, after gaining her freedom, to helping others find theirs through education. They built something meaningful together. Maybe that's a deeper form of happiness than comfort or social acceptance could ever provide. The exhibition became the museum's most visited in its history. Schools brought students to see it. Churches discussed it in sermons. Community groups organized discussions about it. But for Rebecca, the most meaningful moment came 6 months after the exhibition opened. She received a letter from a woman in Atlanta named Sarah, who identified herself as mixed race and engaged to a white man. My fiance's family doesn't approve of our relationship, Sarah wrote. They say we're making things difficult for ourselves, that we should find partners of our own race. I was starting to doubt myself, wondering if they were right. Then I saw the photograph of Robert and Clara. I read their story, and I realized that people have been saying these things for centuries, that love across racial lines is wrong, or too difficult, or not worth the cost. But Robert and Clara proved that love is worth fighting for. They lost almost everything, but they kept each other. That's what I want to do. Your research gave me courage. Thank you. Rebecca kept that letter on her desk. It reminded her why history mattered, not just to understand the past, but to guide the present and inspire the future. The photograph still hung in the museum, behind protective glass, under carefully controlled lighting. It was just paper and chemicals, silver and sepia, 139 years old and fragile. But it was also so much more. It was Robert saying, I choose love over privilege. It was Clara saying, I am free and I am equal, and I will not be erased. It was both of them saying, we existed, we loved, we mattered. And on the wall behind them, barely visible unless you looked closely, unless you zoomed in, unless you cared enough to really see, hung a certificate of manumission, a document of freedom, a symbol that the woman in the photograph had once been property, but had become a person, had become a wife, had become a teacher, had become a hero. The photograph spoke across time, its message as urgent now as it had been in 1885. Love is worth the cost. Justice is worth the fight. Freedom is worth defending. And ordinary people choosing courage over comfort can change the world one act at a time. Rebecca often thought about that moment when she first zoomed in on the certificate, when the words Certificate of Manumission had emerged from the shadows. She had been looking for details to catalog. She had found a love story for the ages, and she had learned something profound. The most important things are often hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to look closely enough to see them. The photograph had hung forgotten in a storage box for decades, its secret buried in the background. But once revealed, that secret illuminated not just 2 lives, but an entire hidden history of courage, resistance, and love. Robert and Clara Fairchild had lived and died mostly forgotten. But now they were remembered. Now their story was told. Now their courage inspired others. That, Rebecca thought, was immortality of the kind that truly mattered. The photograph would remain, speaking its truth to anyone willing to listen, proving that love, real love, courageous love, sacrificial love, could survive anything, even hatred, even law, even time itself.